All right, guys. Today, we're going to discuss client and lender conferences, and kind of set at the start there. Sounds like a kind of a simple thing, getting two people on the phone, but there's definitely an approach and a technique you want to take with this. If you're not putting thought into it, then you could just be landing in some pitfalls. So, um, client and lender conferences. So during the loan process, there can be some key junctures or roadblocks that can be best resolved with a conference call between the client and the lender. So today we're going to discuss in what situations are those conference calls should be made, how to schedule them, and how to still facilitate them. So when to have a call. The conference call should have a specific goal or objective you are looking to accomplish for the client. So you need to have a purpose. It's not just, hey, let's get everybody on the phone. It'll be a good time. You need to have a goal and objective. Taking the time to properly schedule and facilitate these calls will keep the customer feeling confident in you and the lender recognizing that you are on top of the deal. So obviously you want the client to feel as though, you're understand what's going on, you're moving things along. And you also want the lender to recognize that, you are the point man on this on the deal, on the transaction. Because when you're bringing the client and the lender together, you're kind of breaking that wall, that filter between them. So when can these conference calls become necessary? Here's some situations. A lender and client introduction when necessary. Sometimes you'll have a deal that it's just not quite there, ready to be signed up, and sometimes a call between the lender and the client can get the client a little more comfortable, with moving forward, or vice versa. The lender might want to have a little understanding on the client first too. Changes to the project. I think these will be the big ones. The changes when there's a budget, a scope, timing, or people within the project changing. It's a good time where you can just get everybody on the call, and something that you want to discuss. Just make sure everybody's on the same page and it's clear. Lender interviews of clients with a construction manager or an underwriter, something more on a bank side. I've had that before where the underwriter is going to have questions of the client, and sometimes they'll have a specific underwriting interview, and or there's just questions on the financials, which one question leads to the next, and it's just better to hash it out on a call. And then sometimes it's the borrower fatigue or the timing delays. If it's a long process, which obviously we want to avoid, but sometimes it can just be good to a call to build confidence, for the client to hear exactly where the lender's at, the rest of the plan, and make sure that we're all on the same page, with timelines. So you know not sure if anything else comes to mind, for you guys, where you've had to set up some conference calls with clients before. Something that's not in here. This is just a kind of a quick list, but anything you guys want to add on that one, it'd be interesting to hear, when you've used conference calls in the past to keep deals moving forward or save them from a disaster.
Yeah, actually, I've done this before when it's kind of like a complicated, like there's a deal I'm working on right now where there's a really successful business in one area or product
Mm-hmm.
type, but expanding like down the street to a totally different type of product. So it's trying to figure out like, would this be classified as a startup or would because it's under the same umbrella of that, the same holding company.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the backing of this really successful product type with many years of experience, but then we're just opening right down the street with a different kind of product with the same type of business. So trying to just figure out how would you look at it as a lender. So it's sometimes just things that I don't know what to say. So I want to make sure that the client gets clarity from the lender how they would classify the deal. And it turns out it would
Yeah.
be a because it's a different product type.
Yeah, and that one definitely could also be very, um, nuanced as to how different the business is and where the lender, draws the line on how they look at startup versus expansion too. So yeah, it's a good one. I like that. Um,
I would say the only thing is what I call communication confusion.
uh,
Sometimes the um, borrower starts to paint this sort of antagonistic picture of the lender that starts moving into the deal going south.
Mhm.
And the lender does the same. And I've done this a couple of times where I've honestly thought the deal was going to blow up, and I got them all on the phone with the intention in mind of trying to, keep it moving forward. And almost, 95% of the time it works really well. They
Mm.
resolve their issues, et cetera, et cetera. So sometimes it's just getting out of the way can solve the problem. So
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and we'll touch on that a bit later too. On basically, yeah, humanizing everybody too is
yeah.
is a good part of a conference call. But then also there's always the reasons not to do a conference call. Negotiations. That's something where, it's conference calls are not a situation where you want to drop a client into it for just straight negotiation on fees and terms. And then also for proposing a new loan request. Those are the two that come to mind. Um, Guaranteed this will backfire. It will just be bad. Especially, proposing new loan requests, you don't want the client there for anything like that. So don't feel as though this is something, where you should be using conference calls for these two situations. But what it comes down to is it's going to be discernment on your part as the loan associate to identify when a conference call is necessary, but also upfront when talking to new clients. Working with a client that is an over negotiator or that views others as a commodity will make conference calls a difficult process. So I know we do some pretty heavy vetting with clients up front, but this is one of the reasons why, because it, obviously negotiators and those who see those individuals as a commodity, it through the loan process they're more difficult to work with, but especially in these situations. So vetting clients up front, and then is it is this the correct time to make a conference call? It's going to be your discernment. So scheduling. So it's tempting to take the spur of the moment dial and connect approach with a client and the lender on a conference call. This can leave you looking reactionary and leave the client or lender looking unprepared, hurting the other's confidence. So, if the client, brings something up and you're like, this needs to be, hashed out with the lender, if your knee-jerk reaction is just get the lender on the phone, the lender may not see it as a major issue, and it leaves you looking as though you're reactionary. That also could be, something where the lender is then now on the call blindsided by something, and may not give a response that, kind of maybe, building confidence for you or the client, or whatever the situation is. So not the best way to handle it. When a client or a lender raises a situation that would best be handled with a conference call, we will first want to confirm both parties' availability, so scheduling it for the future. This will be done with separate communications to both parties. The best method is a phone call. We'll get more into that later, but establish the client's availability, then confirm with the lender. Really, you could do it vice versa, but establish availability, through separate communications. Don't you don't want to bring it into one email, because you're just going to start the conversation there through the email, and it's going to defeat the purpose of this process. So make sure everyone who needs to be part of the call is included on a calendar invite. Confirm who the client and lender will need present and their reason for joining the call. Give pushback, especially with banks, if someone is invited who does not seem necessary. I've run into this situation personally before with the banks bringing on everybody under the sun to meet the client, and it just, the one scenario that I can think of that comes to mind, it basically turned into like a free for all for the sales of the bank side, and blindsided me. I didn't see it coming. It was all of a sudden, there was, hey, let's connect open accounts, let's do this and open accounts. And, it's like, that wasn't the purpose of the conference call. We were, that's not where we wanted to be here. So definitely give pushback, make sure those who need to be on the call are on the call. And if not necessary, just let the lender know. And again, normally it's going to be with banks on the sales side, hey, let's save that for another time. And then surprisingly, the next step is going to be make sure the calendar invites are accepted. Just because you're sending out the calendar invites doesn't mean that everybody got them and everybody accepted them. And it's going to look bad on your part if you're, telling your client, well, Bob Banker, sent him the invite. He said he'd be here. Make sure they accept it, just to keep everything looking smooth and cool. So facilitating the call will start at the same time as scheduling. By the time the conference call takes place, you want all parties to be aware of the purpose and had time to research. So facilitating and scheduling, really it's going in hand. You want to be teeing it up from the start. This is why it's best to call for a call to schedule the conference calls. There's going to be additional clarification needed leading up to the call, and the following items really should be covered. 1, the purpose of the call. What is to be discussed? Obviously this sounds, pretty basic, but really you don't want to just be letting the lender know, hey, we need to get on the phone with the client. You need to be giving them a specific, this is what needs to be discussed. This is what's going on. We need to have a conference call to discuss that. And reason being is you're also going to need to know what steps does the other party need to take on their end to have a productive call. Really what you're doing is you're teeing this call up for results, not for an initial conversation. So, let them know this is what needs to be discussed. These are, this is the topic and this is the reason why. What do you need on your end? As far as, research, do you need to find out the loan programs with your committee or your lending manager? What do you need to do on your side to be able to bring answers to the call? The other part of that is going to be, what information do you need from the other party to have a productive call? Just telling the lender, hey, budget changed, not very helpful. That number could be 500,000, it could be 5 million. You really need to be able to tell them, this is the specifics of it. And if they need something in writing from the client or, something specific, you need to make sure that you can convey that to the client, provide this information prior to the call. And then also with that information, you can clarify likely outcomes if a change is being discussed. So yes, the call is to discuss the change or whatever issue has come up and what the outcome will be, but the lender should be able to give you some sort of information up front. Hey, we've run into this situation in the past. This is what happens, or that's going to be outside of our policy. Just that way you are aware of kind of the direction that things are going. So once you have that information, you're going to need to share it both parties. Still in separate communications, you want to keep this separate until the time of the call. This can be emailed. However, a follow-up call can be helpful depending on the feedback given. And again, if a likely outcome is given, this should also be shared with the other party. So if you find out from the lender that, hey, this could be a smooth transaction or a smooth change, then convey that to the client. Or, hey, if this could derail the deal, is this really a path you want to go down? Share that with the client. That way, you're going to avoid surprises later on for the client. You're essentially here setting expectations. Mr. Client, we have the call established, or scheduled. This is what we need from you. This is most likely the outcome. That way, they're not blindsided in the call. So yeah, at this point, call should be scheduled. Both parties are aware of the purpose, the information they need to prepare for the conference. In addition, a likely outcome is on the table, which will limit surprises. So facilitating. Now, once we actually get to the call, it's best to just kind of follow this process. It's going to be a simple format of set the scope and the tone of the call, introduce the parties. Good chance these are the first time these groups have been together. Propose the question, change, or concern. Ask for the resolution. and then schedule a follow-up or next steps. So the first step will be to bring up the topic and set the call in a positive direction focused on finding a resolution or making progress towards one. You will also want to establish that you will be the one directing the call. So this is just a little, example I put together. However you word it, this is kind of the meat and potatoes of it. So I appreciate you taking the time to join the call and discuss the Rose Street project. I understand you have hit a roadblock and we'll be diving into the cause later. So you're kind of setting it up front, hey, we're not talking about cause, we've hit a roadblock, but we'll talk about the cause another time. However, we should have the information needed to get this back on track because you've probably gone through this process and you should all have the information at this point. For interest of everyone's time, I have the key points we need to discuss, but we can circle back to anything missed at the end of the call. That way you're letting everybody know you're in charge of the topics of the discussion. If you can get buy-in from them at that point, even better. So that's just a good way to start the call on the right foot, positive light, and kind of the direction that the call's going to be going. So next step is going to be introducing the parties. This is going to be most likely the first time they've had a conversation. So making everybody feel comfortable, and giving a little background on both parties can go a long way in these brief introductions. So, I wanted to quickly introduce you both before we get to the discussion. Bob Banker has been with Bankius Bank for 6 years, and they are very experienced in construction lending. We've closed multiple deals with them. Clint Client has been developing cat hotels for the past 16 years. You've probably seen his 16-story property down the street from your office, Bob. Just something brief. It doesn't need to be overly detailed, but something to connect them is always a plus. And kind of, finding the common ground between groups and all parties can go a long way, especially in dealing with tense situations. Kind of like what Dave was hinting on at the start there. This is a step to really just kind of humanize everybody. If you can, bring up, something of a connection with hobbies, or location or interests, something like that. Now, you don't need to go completely down the rabbit hole of discussing that, but just putting it out there and making that connection, it's just a quick and easy way to just bring people together, and sure, take a minute to discuss. It, could lighten the mood, and make for a smoother call. So next, it's going to be all parties should be aware of the purpose of the call. However, this will be the first time it's being brought up in the group. You want to bring up the crux of the situation to make sure it's clear to everyone. Discussing the resolution will be done after. So just a brief example. Bob, as you're aware, Clinton has had to increase the budget due to changes requested by the city during permitting. We want to discuss the budget increase and how it will impact the loan. So you're really just talking about the problem, what's going to be discussed. You're not going to be approaching it with, hey, Bob the banker, we need more money. It's going to be, this is the problem, but the budget increased. So from there, now you're going to be asking for a resolution. Now, if you follow the process, you're going to have some idea what that resolution might be. So if that was something that was previously provided, this is the likely outcome and the client was in agreement with it, you're kind of already on the right foot. It's really more of just a follow-up on that situation. So you're going to be moving to, when we discussed this yesterday, you had mentioned the need for a new appraisal and reapproval from a committee. Have you had time to look into that? So hopefully, Bob has done his part and given the time needed to explore the options and can give you a positive answer. At that point, assuming that in our simple example here, that's the case, you're going to want to move over to next steps and follow up, which next you're going to be asking for the sorry, I'm kind of doubling up on the slides there. So this will fall back in. Okay. So sorry, my slide kind of doubles up there. Great. So we can save costs, assuming that the resolution is good and you can move forward. Great. So we can save costs with an appraisal update, and underwriting has confirmed the increased budget will work with the cash flow. What does the client need to provide to get the appraisal update ordered? So really what you're doing there is, if you've come to some agreement that the next steps are going to resolve the situation, you need to just make sure that you're in a spot where you're scheduling, the follow-up, what needs to be next, what does the client need to do to keep this moving. You don't want to delay the process in any way. So if there is not a clear resolution, define a follow-up call and schedule at that time. This should be done before the call is ended to keep moving forward forward to a resolution quickly. So following this outline will give you a simple guideline to scheduling and facilitating a productive conference call between the client and the lender. Build on this guideline with your own experiences and intuition to provide a proactive client experience. Now, these situations can sometimes be as simple and basic as just connecting everybody on the phone and a one iteration hash out to get it through. Definitely, there's going to be times where these become a lot more complex, and there's going to be several rounds on a conference call like this. But it's going to be similar format for all those situations. You want to gather the information up front, so you're essentially almost having the call beforehand, and you're really just using the conference call as a spot to come together and discuss the actual resolution, not starting out on the problem with no steps towards a resolution.